The entire history of the galaxy hinged on three simple words: execute Order 66. In our timeline, this command triggered the instant betrayal of the Jedi by their loyal clone troopers, leading to the rise of the Empire. But what if that command was met with silence? What if the inhibitor chips implanted in every clone's brain failed to activate? This is the story of the day the Sith plan collapsed, the day the clones didn't turn, and the terrifying war that followed, not between the Republic and Separatists, but between the Jedi and the monster in the shadows. To understand how the galaxy was saved, we must look at the technology meant to destroy it. The inhibitor chips were organic bioconstructs, prone to degradation over time. We saw this happen with clone trooper Tup, whose chip malfunctioned prematurely. In this timeline, the Kaminoan scientists, fearing the chips were degrading too fast, quietly pushed a firmware update to stabilize them. But instead of fixing the chips, the patch caused a massive synchronization error. When Palpatine broadcast the command code, the signal didn't trigger the trance state. Instead, it simply registered as standard communication. Static. Across 10,000 systems, clone commanders received the order, looked at their Jedi generals, and simply didn't understand why the Chancellor was asking them to commit treason. On Coruscant, the newly christened Darth Vader marched toward the Jedi Temple. He was leading the 501st Legion, the finest soldiers in the galaxy. In the original timeline, they followed him without question. But tonight, as Vader ignited his lightsaber to cut down the Temple Guard, the 501st hesitated. Their chips had not activated. They saw their general attacking a peacekeeper of the Republic. Commander Appo, confused and alarmed, ordered his men to hold fire. When Vader demanded they attack, the clones refused illegal orders. In a fit of dark-side rage, Vader struck down his own men instantly. The 501st identified Anakin Skywalker as a hostile threat. The siege of the temple began, not as a massacre of Jedi, but as a desperate battle between one Sith Lord and thousands of elite soldiers. On the sinkhole world of Utapau, the war was ending. General Grievous was dead. Obi-Wan Kenobi mounted his Varactyl Boga, ready to ride into battle. High above on the cliff edge, Commander Cody received the encrypted message from Palpatine. Execute Order 66. In our history, Cody fired without hesitation, but here, the message played, and Cody felt nothing. No compulsion. No trance. He frowned, replaying the message. It sounded like a trick, a separatist jam, or madness. He signaled Obi-Wan, not with a blaster bolt, but with a warning. General, we're receiving a treasonous communication from the Chancellor's office. Obi-Wan, realizing the grave implication, immediately ordered a communications blackout. The Jedi Master had survived the fall in the original timeline. Here, he never fell at all. On the frozen bridges of Mygeeto, Ki-Adi-Mundi was leading the Galactic Marines into the teeth of droid fire. This was one of the most tragic betrayals in history, as the Jedi Master was shot in the back by his own men. But in this new reality, Commander Bakar received the order and paused. The Marines were cold, calculated killers, but they were soldiers of the Republic, not mindless droids. Bakara assessed the situation. The droids were the enemy in front. The general was the ally behind. The order to kill the general made no tactical sense. Ignoring the transmission as a separatist psychological tactic, Bakara ordered his men to push forward. Ki-Adi-Mundi lived, and the separatist forces on Mygeeto were crushed within the hour. Back on Coruscant, Palpatine sat in his office, waiting. He expected to feel the sudden disturbance in the Force, the deaths of thousands of Jedi screaming out at once. He waited for the confirmation from Commander Cody. He waited for the report from the temple. But the Force remained stubbornly, terrifyingly light. The darkness he tried to summon didn't descend. Instead, his comms panel lit up with reports of confusion, disregarded orders, and Jedi generals asking for clarification. The realization hit Sidious like a physical blow. The absolute power he had crafted for decades had failed at the final hurdle. He wasn't the master of a new empire. He was just an old man in a room, exposed as a traitor to 1 billion soldiers. At the Jedi Temple, the situation had turned into a disaster for the Sith. Darth Vader, the Chosen One, was powerful, but he could not hold off the entire 501st Legion alone. Blaster fire from hundreds of angles scorched his armor. He had expected a massacre of children, but he found himself fighting for every inch of ground. Realizing he was cut off and overwhelmed, Vader made a tactical retreat. He didn't flee out of cowardice, but out of necessity. Using the chaos of a crashed gunship, he escaped into the Coruscant underworld. He was wounded, furious, and hunted by the very men he had led for years. The hero with no fear was now the galaxy's most wanted fugitive. As the Jedi Council regrouped, they didn't just rely on lightsabers. They used the law. In the Grand Army's contingency protocols, there existed Order 65. This order stated that if the Chancellor were deemed unfit for duty or declared a threat to the Republic, the Army was authorized to detain him with lethal force. With the evidence of Palpatine issuing a kill order on the Jedi without Senate approval, the surviving members of the Council, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and others dialing in via hologram, formally invoked Order 65. They broadcast this to every clone commander in the galaxy. The clones, already confused by Order 66, found Order 65 much easier to understand. It fit their loyalty to the Republic, not to a politician. In the skies over Cato Nemoidia, Plo Koon was flying his starfighter when the order came through. Commander Wolf, a clone known for his hardened loyalty, didn't fire. Instead, he opened a private channel to his general. "Sir, command says you're a traitor. Explain." Plo Koon, known for his calm wisdom, didn't panic. He explained the Chancellor's recent behavior and the dark side clouding the Senate. Wolf, who had lost his eye fighting for the Jedi, chose to trust the man who had saved his life a dozen times over the voice of a distant politician. The Wolf Pack reoriented their fighters, forming a defensive escort around Plo Koon. They turned their guns away from the Jedi and toward the hyperspace ring, setting a course for Coruscant to join the fight. By the next morning, Coruscant was a war zone, but not the one Palpatine planned. The Coruscant Guard, the shock troopers, were the only clones fiercely loyal to Palpatine, perhaps due to proximity or direct conditioning. They barricaded the Senate district. Meanwhile, fleets of Venator Star Destroyers began arriving from the Outer Rim, carrying thousands of confused but angry clones and their living Jedi generals. The planet was blockaded. Yoda and Obi-Wan, having returned from their respective fronts, coordinated the siege. The Jedi Temple was secure. The Senate was surrounded. Palpatine was trapped in the deep bunkers beneath the Republic Executive Building, protected only by his Red Guards and a dwindling number of shock troopers. On Mandalore, the siege had just ended. Ahsoka Tano had captured Darth Maul. When Order 66 failed to trigger, the chaotic betrayal on the Tribunal ship never happened. Rex didn't turn. Ahsoka didn't have to release Maul to cause a distraction. Instead, they kept Maul in the Mandalorian containment vault. This was a crucial turning point. With Maul securely in custody and Rex's mind clear, they had a living Sith asset who knew everything about Sidious's plans. Maul, realizing his rival Sidious was now vulnerable, would likely have laughed manically, offering to help the Jedi kill him. Ahsoka and Rex, with their prisoner, jumped to hyperspace to join the gathering armada at Coruscant. The final battle didn't happen on the Death Star, but in the Senate Rotunda. Yoda, Mace Windu, if he had survived the initial arrest attempt in this timeline, and Obi-Wan Kenobi breached the Chancellor's defenses. But Palpatine was not alone. Darth Vader, battered and burned from his escape, had rejoined his master. Master and apprentice stood back to back against the Jedi High Council. It was a battle of legendary proportions. Lightning shattered the Senate pods. Lightsabers hummed like a choir of destruction. But without the army to back them up, the Sith were outnumbered. The sheer combined power of the Jedi Council, fighting as a coordinated unit, overwhelmed Vader. First, he fell, not to a lava river, but to the combined force of his former friends. With Vader subdued and Palpatine finally destroyed by Yoda, the galaxy took a breath. Anakin Skywalker was not killed. The Jedi do not execute prisoners if they can help it. He was stripped of his mechanical limbs and placed in a force suppression cell deep within the temple's containment levels. His tragedy was total. He had betrayed the Jedi to save his wife, but in his anger, he had alienated her forever. Padme, surviving childbirth in this timeline because Anakin wasn't there to force choke her on Mustafar, gave birth to Luke and Leia. She visited him once, looking at the broken man behind the force field, before walking away to help rebuild the Republic. Anakin was left alone with his ghosts. The war was over, but the clone army faced an existential crisis. The truth about the inhibitor chips came out. Every clone had to grapple with the fact that they were genetically designed to be traitors. The Jedi, however, did not cast them aside. Understanding that the clones were victims of Palpatine's manipulation too, the Jedi advocated for their rights. A massive surgery program was launched to remove the chips from every trooper. The Grand Army of the Republic was slowly dissolved, but many clones stayed on as peacekeepers or instructors. They weren't discarded like equipment. They were given the one thing they never had before: a choice of how to live. The political fallout was immense. The evidence of Palpatine's Sith identity and his orchestration of the war shattered the public's trust in the Senate. The Jedi temporarily took stewardship of the government, not to rule, but to stabilize. They then handed power back to a new transition committee, led by Bail Organa and Mon Mothma. The Galactic Republic didn't become the Empire, but it didn't stay the same corrupt republic either. Laws were passed to limit executive power. The Separatist systems, realizing they had been played by a Sith Lord just as much as the Republic had, entered into peace talks. The Clone Wars ended not with unconditional surrender, but with a treaty. 20 years later, the galaxy looks very different. There is no Death Star looming in the sky. Alderaan is whole. The Jedi Order has changed, abandoning the strict dogmas that blinded them. They now allow attachment, learning from the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. Luke and Leia grow up training at the Temple, but they also know their mother. The galaxy isn't perfect. Criminal syndicates like the Hutt Cartel and Crimson Dawn rose to fill the power vacuum left by the war. But compared to the tyranny of the Empire, it is a golden age. Order 66 was meant to be the end of the Jedi. Instead, its failure became their new beginning. History often turns on the smallest of moments: a jammed signal, a malfunctioning chip, a hesitation in the face of an order. The failure of Order 66 shows us that even the most perfect plans can crumble. The darkness was ready to consume the light, but in this reality, the light fought back. It reminds us that loyalty isn't about programming or orders. It's about the choice to do what is right. Even when the whole world tells you otherwise,